Okay, well, we've got a fair few in already. So I'm going to make a start and I'm going to say again, properly welcome to this webinar today. We've called this webinar to celebrate International Women's Day 2026 and the Give to Gain campaign. I don't know if you've heard about the Give to Gain campaign, but it encourages a mindset of generosity and collaboration and emphasizing the power of reciprocity and support. I knew I was going to stumble over that one. Hey ho. Um, the important things was said in the blurb when the invite was sent out to everybody was about recognizing the power and creating opportunities for women teachers to come together and really spearhead this campaign. And that is one of the reasons why I've got Sally with us today. Before we start, I'd like to remind you of the code of conduct. It was obviously on the screens when you were in the waiting room. I'm quite sure you're going to have a lot of questions for Sally. So can I ask you to put those in the Q&A, please, not in the chat. We'll only pick them up if you put them in the Q&A. But with all that said, I'm going to pass straight over to you, Sally, if you'd like to make a start.
Hello, it's lovely to be here with you all. I can't see you, but hopefully everybody can see and hear me and hear my slides. So my name's Sally Rees. I am currently past president of the NSUWT. I have been teaching for 30 years. I started my teaching career in England, and then I moved back home to Northern Ireland nearly 20 years ago now. So I've taught across primary and secondary, but my main focus has been as a drama teacher and a leader of performing arts. So I'm currently leader of Learning for Creative and Expressive Arts in Enniskillen and Royal Grammar School. And I say that because when I tell my story, a lot of the times people always ask me, are you still at the school? So I'm still in the school where I had the experience of being upskirted by a pupil. So I'm going to talk you through my journey, and hopefully even though I would just like to offer a trigger warning now because I will be talking about sexual assault. But I want the focus really today to be on how we can kind of grow, post-traumatic growth really, I guess, how we can grow when something traumatic happens to us. But really, my growth was down to the support that I found in the NSUWT. And I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for them and the support that I give them. So they give me and what I gain from that. So within that context, that's what we're going to sort of focus on through my presentation. And some of you may have heard my story before, and we were talking about this backstage. You know, sometimes I think like, I can't believe I'm still talking about this 10 years later. But the reality is things are getting worse in our schools and colleges. Things are getting worse for women and girls, not just in the workplace, but also in society. And so with that context in mind, I think it's still important to hear the personal lived experience of our victim survivors and how we can use that experience to make an absolute difference and to change societal attitudes that allow violence against women and girls to continue. So let me take you back to 2016. I was called to my principal's office, and when I got there, there was a police officer waiting for me, and they told me that a USB had been found that contained obscure images of me and another colleague. I was totally shocked, particularly when they told me that it was Timothy Boomer, and his name was revealed during the legal proceedings, because this was a pupil that I had nurtured. He was very talented, and I was devastated. I thought this is going to ruin his life chances, because I wrongly assumed that there would be serious consequences for him, both in law and in the school. Unfortunately, that was not the case, and not only did the school not expel the pupil, they actually expected me to carry on teaching him A-level performing arts. It was at that point that the NSUWT became involved, and I met my amazing caseworker, Maxine. So sometimes I think the title of this talk should be From Caseworker to Friend, because that is actually what has happened. But yes, Maxine came in, and it was the first time that I felt heard, and I felt seen, and I felt believed and listened to, because I had no idea how impacted I would be just by the fact that the pupil had, in that moment when he decided to film up my skirt, he changed me from his teacher to an object for his own use. And that had devastating consequences for me personally, because it just completely shattered my trust. I just then became feeling very unsafe, not just at school, but actually in the world at large, because who could you trust? Because we always talk about, I think, how, we are in the position of trust, but also, we trust our pupils. We trust them to respect us, to treat us with dignity, and show us the same kindness and compassion that we treat them with. And as we know, that's not always the case. So it was that point that they said, that it would be unreasonable for me to expect me to teach him. And the school's response was to take me off the class. So not just did they take the expert for those other students who had done nothing wrong, but they took the expert of Northern Ireland away from the rest of those pupils, because I wrote the A-level specification and I was principal moderator and still am for SEA, the exam board. And so there then became a drawn-out process with the school. We tried to make it work under their management plans, but they managed risk and determined risk of him reoffending. They did not look at risk in terms of the harm and damage that it would do to us by having a pupil who had perpetrated sexual harm against us in our working environment. And he remained a pupil in the school for 18 months. And every day I was sent an email, every single day, telling me where he was. And that created huge hypervigilance in me and made me become a recluse in my school. We did go to a refusal to teach ballot, because, as you know, we can't refuse to teach the pupil. And it was supported. But then, come the September, 5 women decided to carry on teaching the pupil, and they left our union. When I asked them why, they said because they personally didn't feel at risk. So, classic example of victim blaming. So therefore, I had done something to deserve to be treated in this way. So it was a horrendous situation in school, and the school then went on. Not only did they remove me from the class, that then created rumours and speculation that I had done something wrong, that I had sexually abused a pupil, that I had was having an affair with a pupil, and ultimately my son, who was in the school, was asked if I was a paedophile. And my daughter, who was in another school, was asked by her peers, or whispered in the corridors that I was having sex with sixth formers. So, and again, the school did nothing to protect me, because ultimately the institution decided they wanted to protect themselves. But what they swept under the carpet tripped them up in the end. Because whilst we were fighting for our dignity and respect in school, we were also fighting a legal case. The law also took the similar position of the school, because the school believed that it wasn't a sexual offence. Even though you could be expelled for one-off sexual offence, they told us, and I quote in correspondence to Maxine, that it was incorrect to categorise the incident as a sexual assault. The use of such language is inflammatory and inappropriate, and your members are not well served by your intimidation that this incident is a sexual crime. This was and is misleading, inflammatory, and incorrect. The law took a similar view. He couldn't be charged with voyeurism because I wasn't doing a private act, and he couldn't be charged with outrage in public decency because school wasn't a public place. The union took that case to judicial review, and it was during that process that we watched the images and discovered that it had been an extensive period of 14 months. And he wasn't just 14 when he did it, he'd been doing it for 14 months. And there was more than one image and more than one recording. And under the process of that judicial review, he pleaded not guilty. And so the case was fought on a point of law. And the point of law was, is school a public place or not? On the 27th of February, he was found guilty of 5 counts of outrage in public decency. But I still have to live with the reality of who did he share those images with? Who has seen them? When I meet past pupils, I think, have they seen images up my skirt as well? And so that is the trauma that I still carry with me. But ultimately, because it exposed the gap in the law, we then went on to fight to change law in Northern Ireland. And in March 2022, that law was passed and the legislation came into force in November of 2023. And so during that, so we turned our casework into a campaign in order to change the legislation. So I am very proud to say that along with Maxine and Justin and the support of the NSUWT, both in Northern Ireland and at home, we managed to make upskirting a criminal sexual offence so that no other woman or girl should have to go through what we did. Now, one of the things about our law is it's actually more robust because it includes a recklessness clause, because we were able to prove that despite the thought that it was just a bit of banter and a funny prank, and that was his defence, that actually you would be reckless if you tried to do that to somebody because they would be offended and it would be reasonable to be assumed that that would cause offence. And so what did I gain from this whole campaign? So that is kind of a summary of kind of my journey from the casework to a campaign. But I wouldn't have been able to do any of it without the NSUWT. And this is what they give me. So in school, as I spoke about, the amazing support of my caseworker, Maxine, who prioritised coming the 90 miles down the road to us, but also in law. The NSUWT funded the judicial review, which actually was the reason why he was then charged with the 5 counts of outrage and public decency. And they stood shoulder to shoulder with us in court, and at every single step of the way they held our hands. And I always talk this about one of the moments that sticks out for me. When we arrived at the High Court during the judicial review, the pupil was there, and I just didn't want to come into contact with him. And people talk about the flight, fight, freeze response and fawn and those kind of responses. But until you've been in that position, you really have no idea how much your body holds the score. And when I arrived at the court, Maxine phoned me and said, "He's here." And I literally froze. I couldn't move from the security. I was looking at the door and I couldn't actually get myself through the door. And Maxine came out, brought me through. But as we were walking into court, me and my colleague, Maxine, Justin, the barrister, and the solicitor from Thompson's, they all formed this line and this protective barrier. And they created a wall between us and Boomer. And so we walked into court without having to see him and without having to come into contact. And that was the kind of support that we got the whole way through. But they also were amazing advocates for us. You know, I only revoked my anonymity, even though I had no right to it because it wasn't a sexual crime and it wasn't charged under a sexual offence. But it was respected to try and keep my name out of the papers. But they spoke up when we couldn't, and when we could, they made sure we had a seat at the table to speak for ourselves. And that was in public, in private, online, with the press, everywhere. They were defending our right to dignity and respect. And then we were able to lobby the Department of Education and politicians for reform. So at every step of the way, the NSUWT supported me. That we held the perpetrator and to account through the judicial process. We held the employers to account. We took grievance against them, which the LRA, the Labour Relations Agency, which is our version of ASCL. So ASCL, what do you call yours, Claire?
We have a couple. There's ASCL, there's NAHT. Yeah, we have a couple of head teachers.
Yeah, but you're arbitrary.
ACAS.
ACAS. I always say ASCL rather than ACAS. So Labour Relations Agency, and they found in our favour. They couldn't understand how the order of protection had been reversed. It should have been the female students first, the female teachers second, and the pupil last, whereas it was completely reversed. And then we actually took a personal injury claim, which we settled with the employers out of court. So we also had that financial settlement. And also, we held the law to account. We said, this isn't good enough. You need to do better. We couldn't have done any of that if it hadn't have been for the NSUWT. And so, what did I gain from that experience? Well, I gained my voice. We were completely silenced in our school due to child protection. As you all know, there's a confidentiality element to that, which I totally respect. But, they give me back my voice. And silence is complicity, and it completely compounded the harm because where was the outcry from the staff in the school whenever he was made a prefect? Where was the outcry from our staff when he wasn't expelled and they knew that he had filmed up our skirts? And that is that thing, that old adage about being afraid to put your head above the parapet. What about just common decency and support for your female colleagues or any of your colleagues? They give me the confidence to own my story because I've been silenced for so long, and that was the most damaging thing because, as you can tell, I'm a talker, and they encouraged me to fight for systemic change. They give me a platform like this opportunity here today, but last week I spoke in Westminster at the UK Feministas launch of their whole school approach. The week before, a couple of weeks before, I was at the PTI leadership symposium where I was talking to head teachers about the difference between safeguarding in principle and safeguarding in practice. But most importantly, I have been connected with other amazing women, some of whom I am sure are on this webinar, who are advocates who lift me up with their validation of my experience when I've been to conferences, but also connecting with other organisations so that together we can create the change that we need to see in society. And I've been empowered. It's probably hard for you to fathom because some of you would have probably met me before or heard me speak before. But I just would not have been able to do this if the NSUWT immediately after that judgment in 2019 enabled and empowered me to go out there, tell my story, get the support I deserved. I still cry when I think about those people when we first spoke at the Northern Ireland Conference in March, just 2 weeks after the guilty verdict, standing up as we walked to the platform. They didn't know who we are. They didn't know who we were. And the validation and the empowerment I have received from the NSUWT has meant that I will continue to advocate for change, to secure the freedom from sexual harassment and abuse for women and girls in our schools, our colleges and our workplaces. But what I want to just talk a little bit about today is about what I've learned and how I hope that I can inspire you to be the change makers of the future. It is personal. We all become advocates, and I always ask people, why did you become, involved in the NSUWT? And this is the thing I'd like to say. Although I've been president, I had never been to an NSUWT conference before 2019. I had never been involved in the union, bar being a member, treating it as an insurance policy, following action when I was instructed to. But I hadn't been to a local association meeting. And now I'm local association secretary. I'm now president. I was president last year. I'm out this year as past president. And I will continue to be an activist in our union because I own my power. It was a personal story for me, but I wanted to give something back. We talked about what I gained, but I really wanted to give something back. And I think my story shows how you can go from a victim to a survivor to then an advocate for change. And the more and more I hear and I watch women talking about their personal experience, it's made me realise that actually, there's power in our personal testimony. I think sometimes, and certainly for me in the beginning, I didn't realise the power for other people to be inspired by what we have gone through together in the NSUWT to change our casework into a campaign for law change. But I think, ultimately what makes us decide to be advocates or become active is because we see injustice, we want to call it out, or we've had an experience and we don't want anybody else to experience that. So don't be surprised if you're on your own initially. You won't be on your own because you have the backing of your union, but it's really difficult. You need to challenge that silence around you, because silence is complicity. And the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. And so I am very, very keen that we introduce the bystander approach. And, a lady said to me when I mentioned this last week in Parliament, she said she prefers the term upstander, but turning bystanders to upstanders, whatever, bystander interventions. I will never be a bystander. I never was a bystander before, and I certainly would be somebody that wouldn't have let my colleague go through the experience that we did in school. So, I mean, it's really important that you control the narrative, that you document your experience, and also think about how you're going to shift perspectives. Like, I think one of the things that really struck me is actually understanding what drove other people to take the positions they did. So therefore, what can we do to change society? So I'll give you an example. I went through extensive mediation with my principal and the chair of the Board of Governors, and two things that happened in order for me to control the narrative or change it was basically the chair of the Board of Governors would just refuse to see it as a sexual assault. And I asked him in that mediation, what do you consider? Well, what is a sexual assault then? And in his view, and this is an older man, he was like, well, being taken down a dark alley and raped by a stranger, you know? And that is the reality of what we have to go against. By the end of that session, he then admitted that I had been sexually assaulted. And I absolutely broke down in that moment. And he did say to me, Sally, if I'd known how much you needed to hear that, I would have said it at the beginning. So I think we have to look for the teachable moments sometimes. And that can be hard when you're up close and personable to it. But it is, we can be very focused on this is our view of the world and this is how we see it. But we need to sometimes shift our perspective into how other people are looking in on that and how we might challenge some of those assumptions. And equally, my principal said to me, because I said, I will not stop talking about this until I change the law. And again, she said to me, Sally, do you always want Enniskillen Royal Grammar School to be known as the upskirting school? Now, at that moment, I said, why is it the upskirting school? Who made it that? It wasn't me. It was the choice of Timothy Boomer to upskirt me. So you need to change your perspective on that. So, it's difficult, but I think one of the things is thinking about how you control and shift the narrative around your battles that you choose to fight. And also connect. Sometimes you will lose friends, but you will also gain allies. And not everyone is going to support you in your fight, especially if you're challenging authority and the status quo. And we're seeing that played out, aren't we? Nearly every day in the media, especially when you challenge authority. So you need to find your allies. And the good thing is, you all belong to the NSUWT, so there's plenty of us here. Sometimes you find random connections with people who can be transformative. And one of those for me was Professor Claire McGlynn, who was doing some research into image-based sexual abuse. Some of you may be aware she's been very heavily involved in the recent campaign with Glamour magazine and those recent changes around AI images. Claire, we just reached out to her because we knew this was her area of work. She's been amazing. She enabled us to get cyber flashing through because she presented evidence to the Northern Ireland Committee. But initially that's because I did some research with her. And, so make connections, talk to people. When you find your tribe, stick with them. And I suppose the other thing is prepare. You're not bulletproof. Quite often we always know what we're going to say to somebody else. And randomly I had some brilliant advice again from a random person. It was an actress. And she said to me about mediation that she'd had with her husband. She said, Sally, you know what your bullets are. You know what you're going to fire at them in that mediation. But what are their bullets back to you? What are they going to fire at you? And that's about being prepared. Being prepared for your response. And then organise the power of the collective. Well, isn't that why we're all in this trade union together? Lobby, organise, tell your story, get people to support you. The key thing is there is nothing more powerful than collective action. And I firmly believe that. And I think I'm living proof of that. So, where there's power, you're going to face resistance. So it doesn't matter if you're operating on a very straightforward problem at school, you need to accept there will be resistance. And there's some great work out there that you can look into in terms of looking at the different types of resistors that you will encounter. I'll maybe share it with Catherine after this webinar and see if we can get that out there. But you need to, so first of all, identifying, it's a bit like knowing your enemy, identifying who those sources of resistance are going to be, and then how to plan, how to overcome them. So there's a bit of psychological kind of warfare that needs to go on, and then focus on what you want to achieve. And I would say not when or how, but what is your how and what is driving you. And for me, it was all about the fact that I didn't want other women and girls to experience what I had gone through. This is so true. Each time a woman stands up for herself without knowing it, possibly without claiming it, she stands up for all women. When we returned from court and the pupil had been found guilty, my daughter, Molly, had pinned this to the door, and you can see the pin marks on it, for all womankind. And that really reminded me of why I was facing this battle, that it wasn't just for me. And when I gave evidence to the committee, when the bill was passed into law, I was mentioned by the chair of the Justice Committee in the Hansard minutes of that, and he thanked me for making sure that the need for the new offences to be comprehensive and operational, which is a source of great pride for me, because we would have just adopted the same law as the UK, and it would have meant that Timothy Boomer, under that legislation, wouldn't have been charged, because he said no sexual gratification was taken from that. But also, I was teaching 4 young girls in my 6th form, 4 18-year-old women, young women. And when I returned to school after the guilty verdict, this is 2019, I had them first period, and they had laid out this beautiful kind of, for want of a better word, party. They had coffee, they had my favourite cakes, and they gave me a thank you card. And this is what the thank you card said. We hope the verdict brings you some comfort and closure. We're so proud of you and thank you for going through this process, even though it was difficult. You have been and are an inspiration and a role model to us, and have taught us we can stand up for ourselves, and this is all to say thank you. But this just wasn't about me, and I think that's the really important thing. We have to be role models for the young people that we teach, and these young women understood that it wasn't just about me, that there was a bigger fight at play, and that I was fighting for them as much as I was fighting for myself. And I have got permission to share the other message that you can see. So 6 years later, I received this text message from one of the pupils that wrote me that card. She had faced a little bit of sexual harassment, look at me minimising it, but she had been made feel uncomfortable by her line manager, and she reported it. She wouldn't have reported it, as you can see from that message, if she hadn't have witnessed the fight that I'd gone through, and the fact that then I refused to remain silent afterwards. And that is what we want to be doing. We want to be empowering people. We want to be empowering young girls. We want to be empowering the women around us, and also the men, to be able to call out sexual harassment and abuse when they see it, be able to report it, but more importantly, be assured that when they do, somebody will do something about it. We focus a lot of our attention on educating young men and boys at the moment about how we tackle misogyny and the rise of online influencers. But actually, we also need to focus our attention on the adults in the room, because quite often they're the ones that are perpetuating the harm and making sure the cycle continues. And we want to break that cycle. And everybody who's on this webinar tonight is a cycle breaker already, because they're here. They've showed up. They've already said they want to do something. They want to celebrate women. They want to ensure women gain what they need to. And also, we have to be prepared to give in order to make that change. But it's hard. And I'm just going to finish with this last quotation. I've been struggling a little bit, and I did share this with the team before we started. A young girl in our community in Enniskillen, Ellie Flanagan, was murdered on Saturday, and she was a friend of my daughter. And it's hard. It's really hard to keep going. Sometimes you just think, will there ever be an end to violence against women and girls? But we have to hold on to hope. And I say all this because hope is not like a lottery ticket. You can sit on the sofa and clutch feeling lucky. I say it because hope is an axe you break down doors with in an emergency, because hope should shove you out the door, because it will take everything you have to steer the future away from endless war, from the annihilation of the earth's treasures, and the grinding down of the poor and marginal. Hope just means another world might be possible, not promised, not guaranteed. Hope calls for action, and action is impossible without hope. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. Absolutely inspirational again, as always. I'm quite sure I've noticed all the little floaty hearts and hand clapping things coming up for when you were speaking. Um, I'd, I'd just like to ask you, because you mentioned your daughter, and I don't want to focus on how it affected your daughter at the time, but now, what does she think of it now? And
Yeah, well, I
has
will.
it inspired her?
Yeah, well, so I suppose I would say that first of all, it did really affect her at the time, and actually, in Claire McGlynn's report, and Molly wrote a victim impact statement as well. She said, and it never went away. I never knew what I was going to come home to find, whether my mother would be home early from work because she'd seen him, or be crumpled crying on the floor because of something that had happened to work. And it never went. It came on holiday with us. It went in the car with us. It was very, very present. And there is some vicarious harm that has been caused. She dealt with a situation recently where her expectations of the authorities was that they would just immediately support the perpetrator and try and cover things up. This wasn't a personal situation to do with her, but and was pleasantly surprised when they did it properly. So I think I would say she's very, I know she's so proud of me. She's my biggest cheerleader, but she goes out in the world with confidence. She stands up for herself. She is not a bystander in any way, shape, or form. And she educates herself, and she surrounds herself with a really strong, close bond of people who share her values, and she will try and educate people who don't share those values as well. So I'm very proud of both her and my son as well. He was the one that's at home. They're 22, 23, and he ran through my presentation. So he was kind of the checker of the presentation. So yeah. But I don't know about you, Claire. I don't know how you feel about this, because quite often, it's kind of like, imagine if it was your mother, your daughter, and sometimes I struggle with that a little bit, because I think, yes, well, I mean, obviously for some reason I was turned from the victim to the villain in my school.
Mm.
But, I do sometimes struggle with that idea that we have to have a personal connection to the person who's maybe being targeted by any kind of harassment, rather than just thinking, no, actually, this is wrong, and we need to stick up for this person, or we need to intervene in this situation.
Yeah, I think that's. I think first of all, you're speaking to the wrong person. You're asking the wrong person that question, because I wouldn't be doing what I do if I felt that I only had to stand up for those people who I knew. And I think it's the same for every activist, isn't it? For everybody who takes on a role within the union. You're there to help, you're there to support, just as your fantastic caseworker did. And as activists, we take on that fight and that injustice for all of our members. And I think that if you were only ever going to take up, I think you'd struggle if you were only ever going to take up the fight on behalf of people you knew, because we know that we are not the best people to represent ourselves in any situation.
Mm.
So if we could, if we would we really be the best people to stand up and represent and fight that injustice for people who we know, or would we be too emotionally involved in it? How much of a step back do we need to take? I mean, I suppose that the fire, I suppose the desire, the drive may start initially from that personal connection. But I think many activists are probably in this room and have become activists because something has happened to them.
Mm.
And they want to do what the spirit of International Women's Day is, give to gain. They want to give something back.
Mm-hmm.
I know that's how I came into the trade union movement. It's how you found yourself in the trade union movement. Um, but I think it's very difficult. I was having a conversation with somebody the other day, and we used the phrase, and I used the phrase to them, you need to pick your battles. And then I thought, do you know what? Actually, I don't mean that. Not one bit of my body means that. And the person I was speaking to said, I've never understood that phrase. Because
Mm.
when I see an injustice, I want to fight that injustice. It doesn't matter if there are 7 or 8 of them coming at me, they're all injustices. And it shouldn't be you have to pick the one which is the most in your face, if you like. You know, but that is why we need strong people around us. Thinking about International Women's Day, strong women around us. So we can all take a turn. We can all support each other and stand with each other as we are fighting these injustices. And the violence against women and girls, as we were saying backstage, just doesn't seem to be going away. And I think it's going to take powerful, strong women and their allies standing up and saying, no, we're not going to accept this anymore.
Yeah, but I think it's that it comes down to that thing. We need to have the men in the room,
Yeah.
and for me, I think, like the biggest issue that we need to kind of, not the biggest issue, but one of the issues that we need to really look at is that triad of male violence. Like, what are we doing to tackle male violence? Because it is mainly men committing violence against other men. It's mainly men committing violence against women, and it's mainly men committing violence against themselves. So
Yeah.
violence is the common denominator that and it's seen as the way in which men respond to issues and problems that they are facing in their own personal lives without mental health support. So
Mm.
and I think this sort of call for male allyship, I mean, I would be very interested, like we probably know how many men, if any men, are on this call today, and I think like anybody who's seen or watched any of Jackson Katz's work, he very much says it's a men's problem, and men are the ones that need to take responsibility to support women and end violence against women and girls.
Mm.
And it
We,
is about how we actually make that happen. And I did speak to some of my ex students a couple, I was doing some research, and one of the things that they said is that when they call behaviors out, they get the attitude in their peer group, and this is young women in their 20s, is basically, oh, don't be such a, just don't be so woke, and yeah, and oh, it's only a joke, all of that.
yeah.
But when their friends call it out, when their male peers call it out, then they stop. That's what
Mm.
they have experienced. So, we do need to educate how people can intervene, challenge, call out behaviors, but also call in. Why do you think that? Let's unpick that a little bit,
Mm.
because I think sometimes, you know, that sort of response to not all men, well, we don't know which men, and quite often it is men in our domestic family circle that are committing these acts of violence. And, I think it's so important that we actually make it there's something everybody can do. So how do
Mm.
we shift it away from women taking on the burden of the work as activists to change the conversation? And there's amazing
Well,
work going on by men, and both within our movement and other movements. There is amazing work going on, but it's how we bring it all together.
yeah, there is amazing work going on. And I'm thinking in particular about the White Ribbon campaign. which is, if you don't know and you're on this call and you don't know, it's about men working with men and young boys around sexual harassment, around misogyny. Please do. I'm sure Catherine's listening, and I'm sure she'll put the link in the chat for you. But we do work with White Ribbon Campaign, and I know at our last Equality Training and Development Day, or it could have been the one before. I'm sure the video is out there somewhere. We had a speaker come and speak to us from the White Ribbon, because it is important to educate men, to educate boys into, what is acceptable and what is not acceptable, what is unhealthy masculinity. And if we can do that at the same time as, there you go, there's the White Ribbon link, thank you. If we can do that at the same time as empowering women and empowering girls, then imagine how strong that would be. I think as well, this campaign, the Give to Gain campaign, links in as well with our Step Up Sisters campaign that we had a little while ago. We had some of our female activists, some of our women activists put together just a little 5 minute, not even 5 minutes, just a quick video about why they became active. And again, we were talking backstage before about the barriers, and I'm sick of hearing about the barriers to activism, because I think we need to shift the focus on, we have a lot of strong, powerful women in our trade union. We absolutely do. So how do we tap into that? How do we encourage people to want to do the same? And I think you've got to see it to be it. And the more we can promote our strong women activists, then there's more chance of them wanting to get more involved and to bring other women along with them.
And I think that's really important because I think one of the really important things is about inclusivity. You know, a bit like yourself, Claire, I'm not really that shy at coming forward. So if I don't understand something, then I ask the question. And I find it quite difficult going to the first local association meetings because I didn't really understand what half the stuff on the agenda was about. I didn't really understand the lay structure of the union. You know, I didn't know what those things meant. I didn't know that I could go to a women's consultation conference and everything would be paid for. I'd have to claim it back, or that conference was paid for, national conference. I didn't know any of that, and I did, and also that going to conference really is a massive opportunity, and particularly the women's consultation conference that's coming up in May. It's a brilliant opportunity to have brilliant conversations, meet different women from all sorts of backgrounds, and it is hard. And sometimes you go into your local associations and you are kind of having to challenge the status quo of people that have been in those positions for a long time. And we all know this. So if there's any other women leaders on this call, if you ask why somebody became involved or joined a trade union, it's because somebody told them to or somebody asked them to. So if you see the potential in other women within your local associations or within your school, then it's so important for you to show your belief in them, reach out a hand to them, give them opportunities to get involved, say, come along with me, that's so important. And that is something that I have done. As I've moved up the trade union movement, I have made a sort of, well, it's kind of a natural thing for me to do anyway, but I think we have to be intentional about it,
Yeah.
and particularly when we know that 75% of the workforce is female, but we also know that it's not represented even within our own structure. If we've got 80% members that are female, it's not necessarily what we're going to be seeing in the top table in a few years. So, I think it's really important that we're doing the groundwork now at bringing our sisters up and making sure that there's solidarity and support, and that we're inclusive in the way in which we kind of encourage people to be involved, because you get so much out of it. You really do.
You do. And I think one of the things that I'm pleased about this evening on this call is that this isn't just a webinar for our activists. We've got staff members in as well, staff members coming listening to it, because the message around empowering women, the message around, we are all in this together and we should be working together to eliminate where we can all forms of sexual harassment, all forms of misogyny. It's massively important. I also think that if we and then there is at least one man on this call tonight, Sally.
Yay.
So a big shout out to he knows who he is. Um, I think that it may only start with one man in the room with one person sitting up and paying attention. It may start with that one woman who's never been to a union meeting before walking in and changing people's perspectives, whether it's a male perspective around misogyny, whether it's a woman's perspective around what does it actually mean to be an activist, to be somebody who can stand up and fight for other people. But small steps, get there in the end.
And I think as well, like, I mean, sometimes I think we're all kind of self-critical too. You know, sometimes we do this thing where we think, well, I don't know enough or I don't have enough knowledge. And you know, I've been in lots of situations recently and I've been like blown away by the knowledge of the men and women in the room who are doing this work.
Mm-hmm.
But then I've got to remind myself this isn't my full-time job. But also, you can't know everything all of the time. And actually, I think that shouldn't be a reason not to try and do something or to get involved or, you know, to come along and see what the opportunities are out there for you, you know. So, and I do think it's so important because I think that idea of give to gain is actually also around what our colleagues, our male colleagues, can give in order to gain a fairer and more equal society. The fact that there is no gender equality across any country in the world, you know, and that's everybody's responsibility, you know, and the commitment to, and I'm sure this will be what Jennifer will bring back from her UN summit, you know, the commitment should be to eliminate violence
Mm-hmm.
against women and girls by 2030, not to just have it, you know. So it's a reminder that actually we all have something that we need to contribute, but it's not just about end violence against women and girls. It's about all of those other injustices and social injustices and the intersectionality that we're seeing for our disabled members and for our black members and for other members, LGBTQ plus I members, from all of those protected characteristics. There's a reason why we have equality at the heart of the trade union movement, because we want to lift everybody up, and that's everybody's responsibility.
Absolutely. Um, I am going to start drawing this to a close, but Sally has mentioned already the consultation conference. The consultation conference, the Women's Consultation Conference, is around Give to Gain, empowering women to work together so that women in NASUWT can thrive. It's going to be on Saturday, the 9th of May at the Hilton Metropole, Birmingham, NEC. And it would be absolutely fantastic if we could see you there. It's one of our larger conferences. It's going to be there's going to be a range of topics, a range of sessions, which are absolutely relevant to our women teachers. A link has been put actually in the chat for you. Accommodation is free, meals are free, we will pay your travel expenses. You will not be out of pocket for attending, but what you will get is the opportunity to network, the opportunity to learn, and the opportunity to speak to some fantastic women in the room who are active and who are moving the trade union forward. So it would be absolutely fantastic if we could see you there as well. So, Sally, thank you very much, as always, for
Thank
everything
you.
for your
Um,
speaking.
and I'm just gonna reinforce what you've said, and I'm also gonna ask if we can just along with the sort of resources around the white ribbon, to actually share the UK Feministas whole school approach, because I think it's really important that
Mm,
we're like targeting the leadership and creating that environment in our schools where there's a kind of led from the front, and there's a very clear a clear direction of travel that ensures that all women and girls are safe in their schools.
Yeah.
So, but
Yeah, thanks for that, Sally. And you, like I said, you've been fantastic and absolutely, definitely. I just would like to point out that somebody's just put in the chat that all members were invited to this meeting. So we've got one man in the room, as far as I'm aware. Go back into your workplaces and ask them why they weren't there tonight, why they weren't here tonight, because allyship is important. And as Sally said, we need men to be standing up and supporting. So everybody's lifted.
yeah,
So
yeah.
thank you very much, everybody. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. Sally, you can go backstage, and to everybody else, have a great evening, and I shall see you soon.
Thank you, and thank you, Claire. Thanks for everybody for joining us.
Thanks, Sally.
Bye.